This episode, history of bass fishing and the early legends there. I started my career in the 60s around the same time as a lot of these sort of earliest legends. I watched the first Bassmasters when it appeared, read their first magazines, in fisherman fishing backs, you name it, as they came along. Sports Field, Outdoor Life, all the gang, and I read from every sort of ones and sort of thing like that, and studied from all the sort of legends, right? So I was just way younger than these people, but had the same sort of skills. I'd listened to all these sort of legendary people and this sort of thing like this. So this episode, I'm going to talk about some of the ones that early influenced me, and this episode we're going to be doing running and gunning except from shore, right? With a modified dollar store spinnerbait that I had to fix the skirts on them because they're poorly made on purpose so that they'll fall apart very quickly, and also that they're an R bend on them, which giant muskies and pike and other things can straighten out. And so then I had to modify it. A lot of times the ball bearings are broken on them. Sorry. Oh my goodness. And so what I have to do is the afternoon challenge. I have challenges all the time on these shows, everything from sewing thread to all kinds of wacky things. So I had to get this spinnerbait to try and, even though the ball bearing's busted in it, to get it to spin enough to trigger sort of fish in the afternoon and things like that. And but I use all kinds of dollar store like things, old lures, old rods and reels, but I also cover new rods of today and all kinds of different things. I've been, like I said, covered with the industry. I work the floors, teaching the earliest pitching and flipping in the Canadian markets, LCD uses, flashers, early structure like sort of things. So I was way before the Van Dams or any of these kind of guys, and I'm a winner of hundreds of open water and
frozen water sort of tournaments of big fish, team tournaments, limits, pools, you name it, any kind of thing from largemouth, smallmouth, walleyes, saugers, carp, pike, muskies, and the list goes on, crappies, perch, suckers, and even saltwater fish. So a whole host of sort of things, whitefish, lake trout, and the list goes on and on of these sorts of things where I've won multi-species of tournaments, and in fact, quite often in the same day, bringing in the largest of each species available and that sort of thing. I just started the tournament series when they were early sort of things. So, Bassmasters was just starting and things, and I had already fished contests by this point, right? So that's how long I've been doing this sort of things like this. And so I'm going to talk about some of my early tournaments and wins and failures, practical advice each episodes and things like that. So whether you think just because I'm using some dollar store like things, I just want to prove to you guys that you can, I should have been in the Bassmasters by now. I was successful for decades, winning all kinds of major to small tournaments, and was able to bring in monster fish all over the place. I was like a Ricky Green kind of person, where very consistent, always in the top 10, almost every sort of thing. And also bringing in quite often the largest bass and things like that. So I'm more of an even big fish specialist than anything sort of thing. But this, I talk about all kinds, and I fish. The last track I had was about 700 tournaments, and I fished many tons more way after that for many moons. So so you should hear me out, and not even a lot of legends have fished this sort of many as I did. And I was extremely successful with I never got skunked into tournaments in decades and decades of doing them. Not one single time. Not even legends can say that. And I had battles with just average Joe guys to the Azumis, the Lindners ones, famous Canadian bass champions, and all kinds of different characters from the United States to everything where they were more known sort of people. And I was able to hold my own against all these sorts of people, right? So you'll hear lots of practical advice and that. And I even show you how to make homemade chatterbaits out of dollar store components. There's all kinds of crazy things we're going to cover, from Titanic carp, pike, muskies, walleyes, and many sorts of different things. So I've been using this canal system and river as test waters since I've been a little kid for other tournaments and things. And using different, practicing different everything from Carolina rigs to flipping and pitching when it first came out, to every kind of thing you could humanly think of. And I would test them a lot on these sort of local waters to see how I could get the fish to trigger and different species and things like that. So even though we're fishing in this weird canal-like system, these techniques can work worldwide. They work all over the place. I won tournaments in Canada, United States, and different places, big giant fish contests and different things. You know what I mean? From using either homemade sort of adapted giant baits to all kinds of things, to even microscopic little things like crappie jigs, using them in tournaments and that sort of thing. So I cover all kinds of wild sort of things here that we'll be covering. And like I said, here in the afternoon, I got to get fish to trigger with this broken spinnerbait and this sort of thing like that. So that's what we'll be doing this episode. But each episodes are all different, all kinds of things. But this one's just for the early guys that had sort of influenced me, as well as we'll be working an island, and I'll show you some casting techniques and how to work an island a little bit better, in bridges and sort of things like that. And in other shows, we'll be covering everything from pitching to working weed lines, worms to homemade chatterbait, all kinds of different things, right? Rods and reel selection. So even though I'm using older sort of things, right, in the first part of the series, it doesn't matter. It's the action of the rod, the content in it, how sensitive it is, how non-sensitive it is, and 5 million things, what it's designed for, what kind of lures it can throw, and all kinds of things. Not so much when you hear a guy and he says, I only use the RJ7 2000 and that, you know this guy really isn't a fisherman, and he's a person who sells things in a store. All right. So I never, when it comes especially to fishing advice, be very leery from what you're getting of those kind of people, because because I worked these floors and did that. I used to remember every serial number of a Rapala at one point. I can't do this anymore. I don't care, right? Like, but at the time, I also had to know all these sort of things, right? And teaching and seminars and different things. So I had to remember a lot of the fishing rods names and things like that. But nowadays, I couldn't care less if it's a Zappity 2000 or a Zippity Boop 222 million. All it matters is how functional it is, what kinds of lure families can I use it with most effective, how well is it of not losing fish, does it break easy, does it blah, 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 right? And so I'll go through all these kinds of things, right, like this, and cover all these things. So whether you're the guys of today from our newest Canadian characters here that are popping up in the scene and showing up in the Bass Masters, Mr. Snow Leopard, to these older fellows that are coming out of retirement, the mighty, oh my gosh, look at the size of that bass, Mr. Nixon and all the gang, sort of thing like that. Whether you're guys like that to amateur newbie guys, hear me out in my tournament suggestions and things like that. I never got skunked ever in a tournament of fishing. At last count, like I said, was 700, but it's hundreds and more after that. So, I'm imagining in around the sort of 1,000 mark sort of thing like that. And the worst place I ever placed in a professional tournament was 44th place in a bass tournament. That was the worst that I ever did. So even the most legendary sort of anglers probably couldn't state that, right? And like I said, I battled against the big boys, the little guys, and still was able to come in with the same kind of gigantic fish that quite often would win for big bass and that sort of thing like that, or win the tournament is the 6 fish limit or both sometimes, and things like that. So that's what was my thing, is to hunt more big fish, and I'd train partners to hunt the smaller ones. I'd leave them areas that I thought wasn't as big of a big fish location that probably had fish on it, and get them to cast into there, and hopefully they could get a few that would add to the monsters that I'm getting. This is enough now to win, right? So because if they were hunting it every time, no matter what kind of partners, from the highest skilled to the lowest skilled, a lot of them lose fish. No matter the most greatest guys I see, I go by seasons without losing any fish, and reeling in thousands of fish of many, many species, from Titanic fish on real light line to all kinds of species, of anything from bass to carp. It doesn't matter what they are, and I'm able to successfully get them in because I have these, what I call the rules of the dragon, that I created in the 70s as a little kid. Of these sort of rules, I got tired of losing some fish at first and things like that, and I kept getting better and better and deadlier with not losing fish, and analyzing what kind of rods was best with what kind of lures that I was going to use under the situation that's always going to have an effective hook setting abilities and things like that, laser sharp hooks, all kinds of things. So whether, it doesn't matter your skill level, like I said, you'll probably get some things from me. I especially spinnerbaits. I've been throwing them since the later 60s. I won lake trout, whitefish to bass contests and all kinds of things before any of these sorts of things ever appeared in anything from fishing tax and fishermen, any of them, for other sorts of species, right? I already knew about this, was throwing Titanic, huge, what you'd call like later on the Roland Mountain big bass spinnerbait, except that I started doing this in the 74, 75 region, and before that was already winning with spinnerbaits of different sorts, beetle spins, Shannon twin spins, rocker arms, ones like those kinds of things, and then early bushwhackers when they came along. But I ran out of blades, and I got desperate and decided, and we talk about it later and things, and decided to try these gang troll giant blades and let the show begin. And I started going all over across Canada, different areas, wherever they had these big fish contests, and I would throw these gigantic homemade spinnerbaits and annihilate people in a lot of places, right? so hear me out of my tournaments, sort of things like that. But here's the guys that influenced me and that sort of thing like that. But the first thing I want you to learn, I forgot about to, I think I didn't mention this fully enough. Please, whatever you do, I was just about to be able to go to my first Bassmasters event after all these ages. I had the right kind of proper boat and everything that was going to work here, and this sort of thing like that. And because I was not insured, I lost 7 boats, hundreds of rods and reels. My partner got in some kind of domestic like issues, lost his sort of things, and everything was lost overnight. So I was forced into retirement, being a guide for decades and all kinds of things, fishing, like I said, hundreds and hundreds of professional to low end tournaments, and making a living enough to keep winning to pay for my entry fees without ever looking for sponsors. I did have 3 sponsors, but they volunteered not on my accord, sort of thing. Like I didn't go look for them, right? And this sort of thing like that. So again, whatever you do, please make sure you're always insured. And you guys got it way easier nowadays than what we did back in the day. I a lot of times my depth binders were broken and all kinds of things. I went on bodies of water I never was in my entire life, and within hours bringing in either a team limit of some sort, destroying the competition, or if they were big fish ones, bringing in the largest of each species, and all in the same single day, and never been to the body of water in my entire life, and did this on weekend after weekend after weekend all over the place, right? So my consistency is like one of a kind here and that sort of thing like that. I even shut down tournaments where they actually, that was one of my tournament nicknames, was Toto. These organizers, after about 7 years of having this ice fishing tournament in Quebec there, they got mad and actually decided to shut it down. And the last year, the guy had said, you know who you are, you're Toto. And I said, Toto, what does that mean? He says, terror of the Outaouais, which is the name for our region here. So I love this name. So I thought it was a sort of thing. I've been given names like the River Dragon or, the Naga, this sort of like, because I'm very tenacious on the water and hardcore sort of fisherman, right? And that sort of thing like that. But this Toto one, I always found entertaining, or Unabomber, because I dress quite often like the Unabomber guy, sort of thing. And I almost look like him a little bit. But the other thing is, people call me this because my lightning bolt casts and things like this. And on these shows, I'm not even going fast. I'm actually trying to instruct you, so I was slowing down, sort of thing like this. So that's one of the nicknames. It was Unabomber, things like that. I've been called the fishing Nazi or coach, doctor of fishology, and all kinds of crazy names over the years, sort of things like that. And from different tournament or people I'd be fishing with, I used to guide all over the place, even guided famous people to Stanley Cup champions, all kinds of different sorts of things, right? So, like, I did my time, man, way before the Van Dams or any of that sort of thing, and I should have been in the Bassmasters a long time ago, but the Canadian market, you'd win with a partner. You always have that team once that had big money, and then now half the field wouldn't show up. So even though you win, now you got to split with your buddy. You still got to get up another $1,000 to be the next one, have the gas and all these kinds of things. It just always made me enough money to keep going to the next one, right? Sort of thing like that. So you need to be a bit more sort of pushy for sponsors. You need to get your name out better than what I did and all kinds of sort of things like that. But here's the guys that affected me in the earliest days. My hero, Mr. Ray Scott. Without him, none of this would be possible. There was earlier tournaments even before him and these sorts of things like this, but this guy was the most greatest showman in the entire world. He made these guys into legends more than, like, if they had been on any other circuits or things like that, this sort of phenomena wouldn't have been as much, right? Because of these sorts of things. So Ray was the greatest promoter ever in history. I mean, this guy was just, I kept dreaming that someday I was going to meet him and get to shake his hand and say, thank you, Mr. Scott, for all the opportunity you've provided a person like me that really knows, besides fixing computers and knowing about mystery animals, my only other severe, crazy expertise is fish. And so you got to stay with what you know, right? Like, because, I mean, there's really, I sort of think. So when Ray came along, I would already had fish contests by this point. So when I first saw this first championship, the first world championship, with my hero Bobby Murray and Billy Murray as well. He was a magnificent fisherman, both of them, sort of thing like that. But Bobby sort of was my sort of early sort of a guy there, and I learned some early spinnerbait tricks from these guys, and became even more insane with spinnerbaits from every legend, from different tricks I learned from anybody from Hank Parker and all kinds of different ones, that they gave me some new trick that I never thought of before, right? Or that sort of thing like that. But Ray was the guy that started it all and made it possible for people to actually make a living, professional bass fishing. So we got to thank him most of all out of any of the sort of thing like this. However, the guy that I wanted to actually thank first, which was my first influence, which is responsible for me winning the hundreds of sorts of fishing contests that I did because of his basic principles. Nobody mentions this guy. They barely talk about him ever, yet he was so influential and such an early master, and so many things I learned from this guy as a tiny little kid. Nobody in the Canadian market was reading any of these sorts of things much. They barely were available. And I destroyed ice fishing tournaments, sometimes winning 8 or 10 in a row. Right, without a failure. Even taking buses as a little kid, getting on a bus with augers and then gas augers and all kinds of things if I couldn't get a ride out to these things. All because of this next man that we're going to mention here, my hero, Mr. Tony Portencastle. This guy here, what was funny about this dude is when I first saw him in Fishing Facts, when they first came out, he started teaching these early sort of things using lighter sort of lines a little bit and things like that. There was other guys too, like Lefty Crane, different sorts of characters out there, even a little bit before him, but that sort of thing like that. But this guy was a master teacher of all sort of things. He taught me here. I still have this magazine somewhere laced away someplace. I remember I have an eidetic memory with pictures, and I remember this article and actually learning about controlled drifts and things like that way back in the day, right? And this guy, he had these early ice fishing sort of articles and things like that, and different ones. And I started some of the things he'd show, these early weed lines and sort of things. They didn't even have some of these names yet, like more in fishermen sort of making this more the terminologies and things, but these things were well known even way before that. Even in earlier centuries, you can find early books on sort of fishing where you see the float was laced along the edges of lily pads and drop off like areas. So even in ancient times, these people, I think, did understand some kind of basic sort of things of this. But this guy was a teacher, and he put it all sort of together. And he was one of the earliest guys that I saw at seminars. I think I saw him in Chicago and Minnesota once or something. I saw him a few times anyways, sort of thing. But each time my parents wouldn't let me to sort of line up for the long lineup to finally go see my sort of earliest sort of idol like guy, right? Even before Al Lindner, which I'll talk about soon, and that sort of thing like that. But this guy was responsible for teaching me about using more finesse-like things the early, when they first started coming up with these blow-and crawlers and all kinds of things, because I was doing something similar to that with pieces of cork for carp and things like that. I would float them up off the bottom and these sort of things like that. So I was already doing weird little experiments as a kid, but when they came up with this worm blowing technique, I started adapting that with carp and other things, because I noticed sometimes that other species would grab this floating up off the bottom as well, and I thought it was a great idea to help float up my niblets of corn and things, because then they weren't getting the cork in their mouth and spitting it out. So this guy's earliest teaching sort of got me into 10 zillion more winds of ice fishing to open water ones, using lighter lines, no leaders, all these kinds of things. And I also lived on multi-species bodies of water, so every single day I reeled in muskies, I reeled in carp, I reeled in pike, and all these kinds of things. And I do this on light line and these sorts of things like this. And what was funny, a lot of times I got way bigger muskies and pike and other things that what he'd show him in these magazines. So already as a little kid, I said, geez, I said, his techniques are so incredible, but he should come fishing with me. He doesn't seem to catch too many like monstrous ones like we do around here. So I already believed in my mind as a tiny child that I could be instructing him, right? Sort of thing like this, right? This is what came in my mind. But you have to kind of be like this if you ever want to be a champion and things like this. Sort of, you're even critiquing your sort of your idols, right? Sort of thing like this. I mean, look at Mr. Van Damme when he came along the scene, right? Walks up to poor Larry Nixon and tells him he's going to kick his booty, right? These sort of thing like that. But there's a difference between believing you can and knowing you can, right? And me fishing hundreds and hundreds of tournaments, this is what I'm saying. There's a difference of knowing and believing. A lot of young people believe that they're the greatest bass angler in the world, but they're really not. But it's good that they believe that because it gives you that confidence and the extra confidence that may make the difference in your day to give you that extra fish that you believe in what you're doing and this sort of thing. But this guy was a master. He had everything from controlled drifts to all kinds of different things. I learned so many sort of back trolling like sorts of early techniques and all kinds of things that helped me win all kinds of titanic smallmouth, walleye, pike, and muskie, different sorts of species contests with some of his earliest teachings. So that guy's my idol of all idols, man. Tony Portcaso, even though he never got the credit he deserved, I know he wasn't some zillion tournament winner or anything like that. But as far as he was a teacher, actually, I think he was a university teacher or a high school teacher. I can't remember, but he was a teacher, anyways. And he was and he also had. I used to listen on his radio show. He had even like radio shows and different sort of things way back in the day, right? So kudos to my earliest sort of mentor. Also like Dan Gappin, and there was other ones and even earlier sort of guys and that sort of things that also early trout guys and things like that, and other guys that were even a little bit before him. But I would say he was the most influential. The first one that made me a much better angler was his sort of early teachings. Bobby and Billy Murray. Bobby winner the first Bass Classic there. I met Billy Murray, actually hung out with him for a bit. I was working a seminar many moons ago, and he was out with his fish tank doing some kind of seminars. Wonderful man. I just love these guys. I mean, these guys were incredibly good fishermen. If they had been born, and even myself in a different era where we were able to do it all again, sort of like the right sort of way and all that sort of thing like that. I'm sure these guys would have been right up there with any of the sort of Van Damme or anybody else. It wouldn't matter who it is. These guys were magnificent, incredible sort of anglers, right? Like sort of one of my earliest heroes, and especially I learned some pretty decent spinnerbait early techniques from them that were very influential on me to testing new sorts of ways, right? Here's the first trivia break. Who was the creator of the Wake and Bacon spinnerbait? Was it Slim Jim McWiggins, Larry Bacon, Basil Bacon, or Jim Sausage? Do 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 do. Do 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 boop 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 boop. And the answer is our buddy Mr. Basil Bacon. He was also, I believe, he created the raised sort of deck, which really improved the sort of bass fishing and other sorts of species game for these kinds of things like that. But For some reason, his picture got popped out there. But so sorry, Mr. Big. But anyways, I was supposed to put his picture in there. We missed out on that one. And next there, my hero, D. Thomas, creator of flipping. I when I first saw this technique around 74, 75, and that sort of thing like that, I had these saltwater rods, and they were about 8.5 feet long and this sort of thing like this. So I started trying to figure out how this was being done and this sort of things like that. And actually, the first sort of fish that I got with it was a great big smallmouth that I caught muskie, and that was largemouth. I didn't catch until about the fourth or fifth species. Practicing with these sort of technique, then I started into this more of a pitching like sort of a thing, and I started winning contests from everything from saugers to carp using these sort of early flipping and pitching sort of techniques, right? And I continued doing it. I still continue to this day, even though in these shows here, I'm fishing from shore quite often. I'll flip or pitch or do all kinds of things like that. I keep up with it because you never know. I could win a lottery ticket tomorrow morning. Great Uncle Gustav, some legendary bass angler will see me and say, hey, that guy's really hardcore. I feel sorry for him. I'll send him $10. Whatever, right? Whatever the thing is always possible. So there's no use me not keeping up with my skills, right? So even though I'm not standing on a trolling motor 16 hours a day anymore, I still got to keep up with it. So kudos to my bloody hero. I mean, this guy, and I'm the world's first person to ever win multi-species of big fish limits sort of contest, flipping and pitching with sort of this technique. I mean, you never seen any of these sorts of things in any of these magazines whatsoever, right? I even had to try it in the 80s in a carp tournament, tournament that I'd won pitching and flipping. I tried to get this article about these early sort of techniques, and also vertical jigging and trout lakes for huge schools of largemouth and things. And these things were all controversial. Now, some of the things that I talk about are, more known, right? But in the day, these things were unheard of, right? And these sorts of things like that. So I was way ahead of my time. I did a lot of crazy experiments every day religiously since I was 4 on multi-species of fish. So whatever lure was out in the market, didn't matter, J plugs to any kind of whatever new thing would come every second. If it said it was for salmon, I wanted to try it on carp. I wanted to see if a muskie will bite it. I wanted to do this. So I kind of way ahead of my sort of time, the sort of things like that. And when it comes to spinnerbaits, I'm insane about them. I've been making them and developed hundreds of different kinds of variants of them. Some wiggle, some work almost like a crankbait, all kinds of different variations I've made where I've won big fish contests with the homemade ones that I made and all these kinds of things like that. So I'm really crazy about that. And I do a lot of sort of pitching and sort of like casts a lot. Sort of this is how I cover a lot of water and a lot of sort of things like that. So you'll hear a lot of my history and these sorts of things like that. But this guy is definitely one of my biggest heroes. And then the mighty Mr. Ricky Green, the consistent one. That's what I was described as. Like I said, the worst place I ever did was 44th in a professional tournament, sort of thing like that. Most of the time, way in the top 10, and actually more often than not in the top 5 with massive tons of wins, or second or third, sort of just missing by ounces. I had quite often the dozens of tournaments with a 2-ounce curse, if we talk about that sort of thing like this. But he was a winner of the Bassmasters All American, 2 BASS events, 184 events, and he got 90 paychecks, right? So I even did better than him consistently that sort of way, right? And that's but I mean, this guy was also known for bringing in monsters all the time. So he was one of my earliest heroes, and he taught me. I sometimes would lose, and I had never figured this trick out, but he taught me an early trick. So did Roland actually mention it in a sort of another side thing, and a few others did all around similar times. So I'm not really sure who's sort of the king or whoever came up with this, but he was talking about his rod positioning for surface lures, and sometimes I would lose some and things like that. And this trick that he taught me, I've been using ever since there. It's too bad I should have put it in, but I got a picture of me as a young kid doing one of the Ricky Green stances there, and I'm got this along the surface and that sort of thing like that. I'll do some shows on surface lures and things and teach you how to not lose fish much when you're gonna having them smash up on the surface and things like that. But this guy was one of the most deadliest anglers ever, and he also was a big fish specialist like myself. So I would consider myself, out of all the sort of contestants, if people were gonna sort of, a lot of people describe me similar to him in a Roland Martin sort of guy, like in that sort of way, right? Because these guys influenced me so much that other professionals that have fished with me and different things, I'll remind them of these sort of people to a certain degree, right? And that sort of thing like that. Now, these two are, Al Linder is like my dad, like God of all sort of, even I learned more from him than even Tony Portencaso or Dan Gappin or some of the others, great ones, and even great guys he'd hang around with, Gary Roche and all kinds of ones. Ron never freaked me out as much as, like, if I was fishing with Ron, I would pester him daily and daily. Like, he'd be zigging and I'd be zagging, and zigzag, zigzag, and whatever he'd believe 100% that no matter what I'm throwing is completely incorrect, I'm sure, and yet I would be able to catch fish in front of him. And he was just kind of a guy that I would have loved to fish with, because I know that I would have get him sort of probably going of some sort, right? That he would enjoy me, but also think I'm crazy, right? Like, sort of like, I think he would have enjoyed me, because I did see them both in seminars, but I never got to shake either one of their hands. I did go by Al Linder once. I fished against him in a professional tournament many moons ago, way back in the earlier sort of 80s and that sort of thing. And sadly, a disastrous sort of thing happened to us. But I was able to actually hold my own against my sort of hero of the sort of thing when he first came out with the early first periodicals, and and then when the In Fisherman came out, they started even superseding the Fishing Facts, because Fishing Facts before that was the number one sort of one, right? So these two, they all sort of, they're different. These people knew each other, and lots of them had interactions with each other. Ron and Al were hired as early guides from this legendary Minnesota fellow. Oh my goodness, what's his name? I can't think of that guy's name. Boy, that's way back in the day. But anyways, he had this sort of, yeah, he would hire guides and get them to sort of go out, and the Linders were amazing. And Al appeared in an early thing because he was out in the local news, saw him as a young fellow. His nickname was Little Worm, I believe it was, or something like that. I'm trying to remember, sort of thing like that. But I mean, so I would have loved to have been one of these people's brothers or sons or something. I just, to me, they're 100% like everything that I live for and everything. They're genius articles, or genius, everything from their earliest sort of structure-like sorts of things from even earlier masters like Buck Perry and different ones. But these guys really, like, I mean, his Lindy rig there, I mean, it's responsible for me gazillions of walleyes and every other sort of person that's ever used any of their Lindy Little Joe products. And so kudos to the mighty legendary. I always wanted to own one of his rings, that amazing ring with the fish symbol there, the Christian fish symbol, and he's got the sort of ring there. I always wish I owned sort of, and always wanted to fish with him, right? So I went right past him, but I saw him in seminars, but I never, again, my parents would allow me at the time to sort of stay, and I never saw him way later when I could sort of, do that sort of thing. Like, but anyways, those guys affected me so much and helped me win all kinds of contests from different tips that they had from earliest messing around with lures and tinkering with them, and like a lot of bass pros today, use a lot of these sort of weighted sort of things to tinker with crankbaits and all that. These were originally ideas came from early walleye guys and things like that, and like even myself in the '60s, I would catch a lot of dead bait, and before these British were making all these dead baits popular and early in fishermen and things like that, I did all those sort of techniques every day. I would drag them along the bottom, wiggle it across the surface just like you would sort of twitching a sluggo or these swim and finesse baits of today's, and I would dart them back and forth, let them flutter down. Sometimes I'd put like a few BB shot in the minnow's mouth and just or wrap sort of a little bit of lead around the hook to make it a tiny little bit heavier, and then I could get the dead minnow down and jerk it around. I'd float it up, suspended off of sort of small floats, things like that. A lot of these techniques that I've seen in fishermen over the years, I actually did these sorts of things way earlier of a lot of sort of things. So even though these guys were my hero, a lot of techniques they did mention eventually, these were things that were being done by other people out there and sort of thing like that. But certainly learned a gazillion sort of things from the mighty and Al and Ron. But Al, when I'd be in a boat with him, I think he's one of the few in the entire world that would make me a bit nervous, where I actually would probably maybe even mess up on something and lose a fish for the first time in ages, all because he's such a legend to me, right? That, yeah, you know what I mean? And but I mean, if he thinks that I'm going to sit there all day and let him reel in 20 walleyes and I'm not going to get nothing, he's dreaming. Then eventually that legendary fuzz is going to get out of my mind, and now we're going to start boogieing, right? Sort of thing like this. But anyways, but Ron, I think I would have had more fun with certain other ways, just because he kind of, to me, he's like the perfect sort of dad or uncle that he reminded me a lot of similar relatives that I had where, listen, kid, you don't know what you're doing like this, and I got 20 bass now and they got nothing, and no matter what, they still would tell me that I'm, it's all luck, kid, and this sort of thing, right? So for some reason, he always reminded me of something like that. Like, I could be wrong about some of these things, but he seemed to me always a bit feisty and sort of like, and I just loved him. The two of them are like my heroes of all heroes. So nothing negative there. That's all positive things. I respect that, right? Sort of thing like that. The Mighty Bill Dance, this guy helped me win all kinds of early pike tournaments and stuff when he first started his dance and eel when he created it, including winning a big bass contest a couple of times with his early dance and eel. What I wish he would have done, and I also caught piles of muskies with it, including one day on the Rita River system, 18 muskies with a dance an eel in the same day. So not too many people have ever done such sort of things like that, but I've actually 7 times in my life caught over 30 muskies in one day, twice at exactly 30 and 5 times over 30, and 38 being my record. But half of these were on the same body of water, and the other one, once a blue moon, it's a bit harder to do, but that sort of thing. But these were in early times when there wasn't as many skilled anglers out there and these kinds of things. It's a bit harder to do these things nowadays anyway. But he had 7 BASS wins, 4 Bass Angler of the Year titles, a magnificent fisherman, and absolutely an excellent all-around fisherman too for crappie, catfish. I learned some great tricks from catfish sort of things like that, and sort of baits and brilliant man, wonderful sort of thing like that. I always wanted to meet him and that sort of thing like that. I never actually got to see him in a seminar. One of the few that I didn't, of the sort of those ones there like this. Now, I'm the Canadian version of Jimmy Houston. There is nobody in every tournament, no matter where I win, I purposely would do this. I'd make terrible spinner baits and leave them on the boat, about 20, and I'd pack them up in rods and everything so that the competitors, no matter what they were looking at, that's certainly not what I was going to be using. But when I'd come in with these giant winning fish quite often, things like that, these guys, all of them would say, we use the Zempango, these spinner baits, right? But they didn't realize that also I used a lot of jigs to win a lot of these things too, and even Rapalas and crankbaits and all kinds of things, and plastic worms and buzzbaits and spoons, Johnson silver minnows to jawbreakers to flipping jigs to all kinds of different things. But I'd say about 70% of the time plus, guaranteed that at least some of the tournaments sort of thing or the big fish came in with a spinnerbait. And so besides Jimmy Houston, there's nobody in the world that's thrown them as much as me. So I always wanted to fight against him and Chris Houston, right? Because they're the only ones that I would deem worthwhile to sort of do this on a daily fun basis, right? Where they would give me a challenge, right? Sort of thing like that. But he had 15 classic appearances. He won the Clayton, New York Invitational. I was so proud of him. He won it with a spinnerbait, from what I can recall. I think they were copper blades, which I had used already on the St. Lawrence there and in winning tournaments in the Ottawa River and different things like that with a Titanic copper sort of spinnerbaits for smallmouth, largemouth, and different species. I love copper blades, like way more. I prefer to use them. They work in almost any color stain of water, and they trigger even bigger fish quite often, things like that. But I'm pretty sure that was the same one that he won that with. But I haven't been able to find that show anymore. I used to have it on tape, but sort of thing like that, and I lost it over the years, but I was so thrilled for him at the time, and I love the way he casts. Him and I are very similar in a lot of ways, and I've been told this all over the place, like, how come you throw spinnerbaits and we're all throwing the same spinnerbait, yet we don't catch anything and you catch? Like, they don't understand, right? And I've been told that he can do the same kinds of things, right? Like, so, but we're just, yeah, you know what I mean, spinnerbait lunatics, right? So I any person in the world that I wish I had a care package from, I lost about 500 spinnerbait blades in a huge tournament because my crazy partner decided to do some silly sort of thing, and he bounced into the side of the box and it went flipping overboard and sunk into the depths. So I lost. I only have old ones laying around from homemade ones that I made and certain things like that. So I'm running really low on some of these supplies, I'll tell you, to do these shows. But anyways, but but I just love the Houstons. He's got a donkey farm out there and sort of thing like that. And I mean, a magnificent fisherman, and certainly when it comes to the spinnerbaits, like I said, him and I are right up the same sort of angle there, right? Now, next, the mighty Mr. Rick Clunn, always getting it done there. Four-time Bass Classic champ. Money over over 300 of them, first place 16 times, right? I was so proud of him in recent years when he won those few Florida ones. I couldn't believe it. I was in tears for the guy. He gave me encouragement that even at my age, I could, if I somehow ever got the back enough money to enter one of these again, that I could do it. I mean, he can win in his 70s. I could still do it, right? So it'd be possible, right? And that sort of thing like that. So he kind of encouraged me when I saw that, right? And this guy's a deadly sort of crankbait master. I love crankbaits too. I got a tip actually for Mr. Clunn. Now, this is just my findings over massive decades of also winning all kinds of tournaments from crankbaits and things like that, from the earliest old ones to, I even have boxes here of that weren't luckily stolen, of really old baits, from old color selector ones to way before those times, and all kinds of things, right? Sort of thing like that. I love these older lures too, and that sort of thing like that. But I used all these kinds of things like that. But I did, when it comes to what you were talking about, bass with these slow glass rods, that's true with largemouth, but I noted in smallmouth sort of contests, I find this very rarely that this is going to work out properly for you, and you're actually way better with a more faster action sort of thing. You just have to time when to set the hook, even lean the rod towards you for a split second when he hits to allow him to get it more in his mouth. Whatever you have to do, you have to adjust this sort of a different way, because for some reason it seems that it doesn't work out well. I'd love to see underwater cameras as to why this is, but I noted that, and so I've always had way more success when it comes to smallmouth, no matter what, no matter how weird that they're hitting and things like that, with a faster sort of action sort of rod for that sort of purpose, right? Now, you may disagree with that, but for me it works out, right? So So yeah, but anyways, I love Mr. Cludd. I couldn't be more thrilled for him. I hope he keeps winning and winning. I hope he can even beat Van Damme and all the rest of it. I'd love to see him do it. I mean, because I got to give him credit and that sort of thing like that. He's the mystical Miyagi of bass fishing, right? Like everything about him. I would love to own a few of his sort of what he'd suggest, like some really good crankbait rods that I could borrow for tournaments for a long time. I'm also desperate for some flipping sticks, that sort of thing. That most of all because I use flipping sticks for any kind of bait casting, sort of baits from spinnerbaits to plastic worms, way more than any sort of other rod needed. I've learned how to use these things where to my advantage, where it works for me, right? I'm not saying maybe it's the best for certain individuals, your arm lengths and all kinds of things may have some things to do with this sort of things. Like I don't care about fast or slow gear ratio. I can slow it down either way. I time these things like I've seen Mr. Clund do, so he's a very brilliant man. I do all kinds of sort of things like him, when I'm messing with things. But he had these wonderful white rods. I can't think of the name of them there, but they're just fantastic. He had one with a homemade sort of chatterbait, I think he had on, or a swim bait of some sort of thing. Different ones that he was using, a wonderful sort of rods. They look very good, sort of thing, and similar. Like I hate pistol grips and sort of thing like that. So my criteria for rods are a certain way, but I really, when it comes to sort of that sort of thing, that this guy has really good sort of taste, a very well in-depth thought sort of person and a true master and very tenacious and wants to win every single time and knows he can. See, he's a knower. You see what I mean? Because this guy's fished massive hundreds of tournaments. He knows he can win. Lots of guys like our newest phenomenas and things like that, and just because a guy wins some big event, he believes he's the best. Believing and knowing is very different things. Right? So to me, this guy knows that he still has the caliber to boogie with the young kids to the old ones, right? And he keeps up with things, and he's the mystical Miyagi of fishing, right? So kudos to him. He's absolutely my hero, sort of thing like that. But my number one king, Roland Martin, the Bass King, this guy, he was the only one in the early magazines that I'd see have bigger bass in the magazine than what I was catching all the time. So I didn't understand it first. I thought because a little kid, I didn't realize regionally every spot that I'm in that the bass is more average, bigger or smaller, depending on the country. But I quickly learned these things. But at first, he even more scared me. I said, "Oh my goodness, man, that guy's beating me every day. He must be like." So I considered him almost like my dad, like of the fishing world, right? And his earliest teaching from structure and his early flasher teachings, water clarity meters and flipping and pitching, his early spinnerbait techniques. I learned more from this man than many of the sort of guys after him, sort of things and all that. And I mean, 306 tournaments here, 19 first place, top 10, 102. I believe it was 19 second place. At first, I was thinking it was 25, 26. I don't know why I thought that. Somehow, some other statistic I'm getting mixed up with, maybe somebody else or something that I got the two mixed up. But anyways, if you look at him compared to even like a Van Damme and that sort of thing, Van Damme won 25, but he wasn't in second place 19 times, so he wasn't in contention remotely as much as Roland was. So if you were going to add these two up, right, that'd be 38 times if that other person hadn't have shown up each time that he would have won that, right? So I disagree as far as who the true king of bass is, right? So I'm always disappointed when they ask these different legends and nobody says Roland, right? So I'm sorry, I'm going to stick up for Roland. I met his son, Scott, and I encouraged him. I'm one of the first people that probably ever encouraged him to start entering bass tournaments. And I couldn't believe that he wasn't already entering all these kinds of tournaments at his age. And I met him when he was very young, sort of thing like that, when the Roland Martin's Marina was just out. and he was a wonderful guy, and showed me around. Took a long time showing me different things. I wanted to meet his dad and show him my big roller giant spinner baits that he later came out with, these roller mart big bass spinner baits that I talk about and that sort of thing like that. And the second when he came out with these, I see all of a sudden people in this tournament, and I already had big spinner baits rigged up that I was going to be using again anyways. And I said, oh no, the cat's out of the bag, right? And then all these people are start throwing them more, right? So I just used different color blades and different designs to make sure they didn't look too much like his sort of thing. But I did buy zillions of them just because they were good, because they were strong wire. They can handle bigger muskies and pike and sort of thing like that, well designed. And he's my hero, right? So of course I'm going to buy a few from sort of thing like this. So no matter what anybody claims, I mean, I learned more from him than any sort of all the different ones there. And he will always be like my dad of sort of fishing. And then later on, sort of Al Linder, even though Al Linder isn't massively even older than me, a sort of thing like that, but he just was raised with Ron and they did it. So Al's kind of like, we were both very young doing this, like, so, but he just a little bit older. But when I first started listening to him, he kind of just sort of like, he'd be like my big brother sort of thing, like to me, right? But sort of be, that sort of thing. So this is what I think of those guys, man. They all influenced me the most, sort of anything. But yeah, who impresses me way more than the people of today, even my hero Roland, this lady here, she had more diversities than anybody in the planet. You know how hard that this would be? She won 7-time Bass and Gal champion, okay? So, right, 3-time Bass and Gal world champion. That's the same as her classic, right? And I've never found this fair that what I think that they should do is when you win the Bassmasters Classic, they should bring these female ones back, get proper sponsors for them. How do you know that like when I was young, I was with this lady, and sadly some happened that sort of, it wasn't a good thing, let's say. But I was thinking maybe I was going to be having some daughters here. So my idea is I wanted to bring them into the United States and train them and make them the world's deadliest female anglers, and sort of do with the spinnerbait like sorts of things, and make them, battling with the Houstons, right? My sort of legends back in those days, right? And that sort of thing. So this was my dream, and that sort of thing like that. So I took children, young ladies, and on their first attempts, had them winning ice fishing and open water contests, no failures. Each ones that I brought out in that sort of thing like that, girls and boys, with my techniques, and not helping them by just instructing them and showing them how to properly do things, and explaining how to do things, how to battle the fish without losing them, and these kinds of things like that. So that was my dream. And now these things are shut down, right? And not the sponsors and that sort of things, the poor Penny Berrymans out there and the different ones that could have made lots of money. So I would like to see the future if they actually had that you got the world championship for the guys, you got the world championship for the females, then have the ultra world championship, and it's a battle, females against the guys, everybody's there, it's the champions of champions, now for the elite world champion, like sort of thing, right? And how many times would maybe possibly a female win? Women are extraordinarily, quite often, males will know this, some woman's never been in a boat in her life, she drops the lure on the side off of the boat. All of a sudden, a 4-foot muskie comes flying out, nails it, jumps in the boat, and they land it. I've seen the craziest stuff you could ever possibly imagine. In fact, that many years ago, this woman, it was the most infuriating thing to me in the world. I got a 32.5-inch walleye. This lady never fished in her entire life for walleyes, never did anything. She casts out this sort of thing. I'm instructing her. I said, let it sink down there. So then she gets into a snag, right? So I said, okay. I said, no problem. So I jiggle it loose there, and I start moving along, and all of a sudden, bang, it nails it. One nails it, right? So then I said, here, I said, battle with it like this. So she gets it up. She gets this 33.5-inch walleye now beating mine, right? So I was infuriated by this, that you never even do this, and you've caught in a walleye that they're quite rare when they get to this size, right? And I'd worked so hard for this monster already, right? So I fished for hours and hours. We kept going back and forth, and then finally, after about 6 hours later, I get a more titanic one, a 34 and a half inch. So her and I won these big sort of walleye like contest sort of thing and this sort of thing, but it was hilarious. I just couldn't stand the fact that, you know what I mean, this newbie came from out of nowhere, and she gets like, it was so, you know what I mean? I'm going to now come in second place at a fishing contest with her, and you know what I mean? So I couldn't handle that, right? So nothing to do with that it was a woman. It was simply that she had no experience, right? And these kinds of things happen. So this is what I'm saying. You never know why women can, and the ones that are skilled like Chris and that sort of thing, they can be deadly anglers. I've seen some women that can really, really cast extremely well. Penny Berryman's very skilled angler. All kinds of ones out there exist, right? So it's an awful shame. I wish some wealthier women would get together. I'm sure Oprah has a few dollars, and these kinds of people, right? Or Ellen, anybody, wouldn't matter who it is, somebody that's big and influential that could sort of sponsor this again and get these things sort of running. And I'd love to see something like that. I would think that would be a really cool thing, because I don't think it should be a guy woman thing or any of that sort of thing like that. I mean, I've seen, like I said, there's incredible female anglers, incredible guy anglers. They're out there, right? Like look at Hillary Martin, just like her daddy and her grandpa, and that sort of thing like that. Continuing on the tradition, fishing all kinds of tournaments. She's a deadly angler, man, already, and she's a young lady, right? So I mean, is it fair that she isn't able to get the highest accolades like her daddy and other ones just because she's a girl? No, I don't agree with this, right? So I don't have a problem with it. Anyways, to me, even if I lost against the mighty Chris Houston, if it had been back then, I would have been the first to shake her hand. Doesn't matter. I still won a world championship for the guy one, so at least I can pester all them. All right. I mean, at the end of the day, whoever wins, they're the world champion, right? So whether it's a girl or a guy or whatever, right? They deserved it. I mean, it's not likely somebody's going to get lucky for 4 days in a row or 3 days, different things, right? In tournaments, somebody might get lucky for an hour here or there, pull up and get the monster stringer, but to keep doing it every day, and you win 7-time Basset champion, bringing in the most weight out of all the sort of ones, this isn't luck. This is high skill, and this lady could certainly have taken on male champions as well and handle her own against them, I'm sure, right? So this is what I'm saying. So to me, I wish the sport was a little bit more sort of thing like that. So I don't want to scare away any of my redneck buddies and stuff like that. Like I said, I fished in Oklahoma and all over the place. So I love you guys too and all that sort of thing. But at the same token, there's nothing wrong with, if the woman's willing to work for it hard and the sort of thing like that, she deserves a chance to become a champion too, just like anybody else, right? So anyways, we'll continue on here with our show there. And we'll start it. So this was my tribute to legends. Now I'm going to start teaching running and gunning, teaching you spinnerbait tricks and talking about some early tournament mistakes and different things like that. So thanks all the legends out there. There's hundreds of more, from the Bass Professor to I mean, I could go on day and night about all the ones I'd like to thank that taught me a trick or two. So anyways, stay tuned, and we'll continue on. Welcome, folks there. What we're going to be doing is running and gunning along the historic Rideau Canal here, and I'm going to be showing you some different spinnerbait tricks as we're going along, and I'll talk about some early tournaments and different sort of tournament applications here. The first fish, what I did is I slowed down the profile. It's early in the morning, it's cold, so I let it flutter down, and I'm just showing you little parts of the canal as we're going along. I'm doing a run and gun sort of challenge here, and then in the afternoon I'm going to be actually using a different sort of a bait where I have a deadly challenge. I got to use a dollar store spinnerbait with a broken ball bearing and somehow figure out a way to get fish to react to it. So if you think, Mr. Houston's the only guy that's been chucking these, have been throwing spinnerbaits since the late 60s, right? Here I had to change and adjust it because It's still cold in the morning, so I put a stinger hook on it. Another trick for you. I'll show you how to do that in other episodes and things like that. But I'm just sort of running and gunning here and just showing you little bits of areas as we're going along, sort of thing like that. And Colorado silver blade on it there. I fluttered that down along that bridge pillar there and tinkered along it, whammo. There we go. Sort of thing like that. And that's a swinging bridge over there. Sort of thing. And there's next one. Now I got this one. I made a super long cast. And you see that sort of a floating fake dock-like thing. I got that one off of there, and he scooted off this way, so I walked over and battled with him, and there we go. So next I'm going to be showing you about the... So folks, I'm using a modified dollar store spinnerbait there. What I did is I twisted it. It had an open sort of bend on it. I twisted around with a pair of pliers. A couple of wraps on it because muskies, pike, and other larger predators can straighten those out, so I don't use those, especially in Canadian waters. Also, I'm fixing the silicone skirt that came with it because they tie it really cheap with a couple of threads, and after one fish, it'll bust loose, and now you won't have an effective bait anymore. So take some of your monofilament, wrap it around in the center, and tighten it up and they're good. And now you got an industry strength bait here where the hook's reasonable. Be careful with dollar store spinner baits with their smallest models with very light heads. They make the hooks too weak in them and quite easily a big pike or muskie will destroy it. The average size spinner baits that they make with a little bit larger hook is more effective where they don't as likely going to go, right? Sort of thing like that. You can reel in a bigger, more decent sized sort of fish with those models, right? So be careful of that. So what I'm doing here is I'm just showing you islands have saved me in dozens of tournaments over the years, from anything from winning to at least placing high all of a sudden because I pulled up on an island. Right now there's a little point there. I'm working first. You never cast right up on the best spot first. Go further off because the point may go further down. There could be a drop off there. There could be a smaller fish that were pushed off by bigger fish that's holding on the best spot on the sort of point, and he pushes him off. So if you hook this fish, you might not disturb that bigger one. So it's possible to get now a couple and that sort of thing like that. So even though they show on TV, Denny and everybody perfectly doing that, we'll do that too. But, it's best to sort of not hit directly the best spot first. Try and see if there's any fish that have been pushed off to the sides of it. Then get in there. And right there, you can see there's a shade line along. So after I've worked this sort of point numerous times and different things like that, then if it's still not working, then I'm starting to work and putter along these sorts of areas. You can see there's a shade line there and that sort of thing like that. Work those and get way up underneath and right up onto the bank. Another thing you might want to do sometimes, not to spook spooky fish if they're in crystal clear water, is actually purposely land it right up on the edge of the bank and just let it sit there for a second and then drag it in, right? This looks much more natural than some kind of frog or some kind of thing is now, yeah, you know what I mean? And it doesn't disturb them as much. And sometimes they'll really smash it better than just perfectly landing it in the water and that sort of thing like that. So just another thing that you might want to think about, and work all the different trajectories of the point at different angles. Sometimes by coming at them at a different sort of angle and different things like that, you might be able to now irritate them to get them to hit it, right? And that sort of thing like that. So it's a nice day out. We already got our limit, sort of thing like that. And now I'm just giving you a little bit of instructions here and that sort of thing like that. And I'm burning it up on the surface to letting it flutter down in these sort of deeper holes that's in front of it and different sorts of things, right? So now I'm twisting it over here. A lot of times when it shut off, all of a sudden I'd hook one or different things. It's a real pain sometimes to try and get this organized. But anyways. So you can see the shade lines underneath there and different things like that. You can see there as perfect. I landed it right up on the edge of the bank there, and now I'm flooding it along that shade line and into these sorts of things like that. So, you know, if you want to be successful too, you also have to be, besides a lot of even the highest professionals, I go by thousands of fish per year of all kinds of species and don't have any break me off, and almost never lose any. Some years ago by years without losing one single fish. So once he's hooked, he's hooked. I used to fish with this guy from Oklahoma, and he'd say, "It's all done, son." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he says, "Yeah," he says, "I noticed I've never seen you lose any fish." And so even the most legendary guys, my statistics are even a little bit higher than these nines out of tens. It's 99.99 out of 1,000 sort of thing, like 999 sort of thing, right? So what way sort of higher in this sort of thing like that. I learned as a little kid not to break off fish and use lighter and lighter lines and sharper hooks and different things, and making sure the rod can handle it and different sort of things like that. So there's a little fellow. We finally got one off of that. Sadly, every time I'd shut this off for a second, I'd have to sort of shoot it this way, right? Because I was trying to do this presentation. But anyways, these are the things I do there. So now you can see I hit perfectly right on the edge of that shade line, right, and that sort of thing like that. So we're working along. But these are the sorts of things. I'll teach you all kinds of things. But islands can be fantastic for everything from walleyes to smallmouth bass, largemouth, whatever. Did you see that? It went way, way underneath. So it's not only the Denny's and the Houstons and everybody else that can do these things too. I've been able to cast like this since I was 5 years of age, right? Like world class already. And at 4, I was pretty close to this sort of thing, right? So practice, 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 right? There's a little bit of sandgrass. You'll get on that. If you're finding sandgrass, quite often that's a good weed for lots of species, but especially smallmouth bass, things like that, sort of thing. But we're working away here. It's a nice, pretty island, but they can certainly save you. Some will drop off, and I'm testing always the hook sharpness constantly. I notice a lot of professionals don't seem to do that. I notice the guy loses the big fish, and I notice he didn't even check his hook. I also notice I see a lot of kids of today, these Canadian sort of followers of Mr. Van Damme, or these ones, the snow leopard fellow and all these other ones. I've noticed a lot of them, they're always retying rigs and things. Why aren't you? I was already noted in the papers in the 70s and this sorts of things like this. They'd ask me, being facetious, being smart alecky, because I kept winning these tournaments. They'd say, "Young fellow, how do you prepare for a tournament?" And I said, "Usually I have at least about 7 rods rigged with different presentations and things like this. And quite often I would have at least like 2 or 3 of the main sorts of baits I'm going to use, exactly the same sort of thing. So that way, if one gets stalled for a second, I don't have to have time here. Here's another one there. I got him right away." Just a little fart, but anyways, so there you go. But this goes to show you, right? So here's another one there. We just moved on and sort of just a little bit over to the island and that sort of thing like that. And then so these are the things that I would do, right? So and I constantly did this all over the place like that, and make sure that I had more quite often, if I knew whatever was working, that I have a backup so that it's sharp, right? And this sort of thing. Other places that have saved me and helped me win all kinds of tournaments is bridges. Bridge abutments and different things like that. Look for anything irregular on them, holes that are below or in front of them, different things like that. Any kind of unusual things that have washed in there as well. There could be some washed out hole, little things, right? Whatever it is that's irregular down there, bridges can save you and get monster fish. Some local fish hang around bridges all the time, big schools of them. They don't leave much except to spawn a little bit not too far off from the bridge, typically in some sort of area right near it, and that sort of thing like that. So keep these things in mind. But anyways, we'll give it a fish break here and a sort of thing like this, and we'll get on this side. And this is the challenge in the afternoon. I'm going to use a broken dollar store spinner bait where the ball bearing wasn't working, and I have to, like Jimmy Houston is noted to do, be able to still trigger fish, which is quite hard when the ball bearing isn't working properly. But I know 10 zillion tricks with spinner baits, and this is what I'm using here. So I'm using a old bullets sort of worm weight as a weed guard as well, to help it sort of twist a little bit to get enough reaction that I can trigger some sort of fish. So stay tuned. We'll have a fish trivia question, and we'll be back right at it. Yeah, I just think these up as randomly as I go along. So all these ones I'm just doing for memory. One of these times I'm going to mess up probably or something. At one time when the Bassmasters game came out, I actually only got 3 wrong out of the entire book with a gang of Bassmaster wannabe sort of characters. And they got so bored of me destroying them that they actually just opened up the book and started reading each question. And the only 3 that I didn't got wrong, here's what they were. I said 9 BASS wins for Roland Martin, but in the book they said 8, so they decided to pull a George Costanza moops on me just to bug me. They knew I was correct, but they're just to be irritating. The other question I answered right away. I said it's either a Cordell Spot possibly, or a Nils Master, or maybe a Rapala, because the question was a bit obscure and I wasn't sure exactly where they were getting at. And I had had quite a few beers in me, and sadly their papers were very blurry, and I didn't notice that there was a little dot on the sort of a picture when they showed it, because it was funny. I told them already the answer before they even had the pictures out or anything. So I didn't notice the spot on it, so I said a Rapala, and it ended up I was right in the Cordell Spot. I would have known this 100% if I had seen the little dot on it, right? It wouldn't be a Rapala, right? So I don't feel bad about these two. It wasn't even really like, I mean, yeah. So the only one I did not actually know was some kind of reservoir in Texas. I still don't remember the name of it. Never recall seeing it in the Bassmasters and Fisherman Fishing Backs or any of the other major ones. So I have still to this date, still don't remember what the answer is. So when Mr. Van Dam first came along like this, they were going on about his, because he had studied from all these guys, and they thought this was revolutionary. And my buddy that was sitting with me when we first seen him come on the scene, he says he's not the only one that knows that sort of thing. He says you passed the entire whole thing. He said you only got a few questions wrong, right? Like this, and so he already so even if Van Dam was going against me, the most he could do would be tie me in sort of this, because now I know what these misprints were, a sort of thing like that. So even a guy like him, he wasn't the only one that read these from cover to cover and practiced everything. And I was doing it way before he was ever around, right? Sort of thing like that. So I mean, sort of thing like that. So, but which one of these bass legends here won a bass event on Lake Okeechobee that they're not known to really be fishing this kind of technique too often, right? And that sort of thing like that. Roland Martin, Tommy Martin, Mr. Flip, Denny Brower, the mighty Rick Clunn. Do, 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 do. Boop, 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 ba-doop, 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 doop, 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 bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, bum. The mighty Rick Clunn. I remember when he won this, I watched it on the Bassmasters there, and I mean, it was the weirdest thing, like to see him come in, and he comes from out of nowhere and just wins the thing, right, with a red shad colored plastic worm, right, and that sort of thing like that. So I just do these off of memory, like whatever pops in my head at the time, sort of thing like that. So we'll continue on with the show, and and a few other things there. Just so for the show, if you guys understand this, yes, the beginning of it, I'm not showing much fishing, but in the other ones, there are way more films. well, we got some incredible fish on film, including what I put at the beginning of the show. I don't consider that a big smallmouth to me whatsoever, right? Like I said, I've been reeling in Titanic smallmouth and tournaments all over the place since the 60s, right? So a long time. So, but the reason I put that smallmouth on there is on one of the shows, if you see on the side of the smallmouth, you'll see Titanic teeth all across them. I was reeling it in and a monster muskie nailed him. And I saved his life, right? And that sort of thing like that. So I have insane films of even Titanic largemouth attacking other sorts of fish as I'm reeling them in, and all kinds of crazy things that we got on film, things like that. So there's some really good things through them. The videos got better as we went along because I finally started understanding what I'm doing wrong. I'm a retired professional fisherman. I'm not video game kid here at 14 that knows how to put these videos together, right? So be patient with these sort of things like that, but they keep improving each episodes and things like that. I figured out what these sort of things are, and so we don't make the same mistake, hopefully, as much, right? And that sort of thing like that. But anyways, the practical advice is there for you and these kinds of things like that. You'll see a lot of sort of fish, and so we'll continue on. So, folks, we're continuing on here. the We're on this side now. And so if you want to know about sort of tournament fishing and things like that, like I said, I started my fishing sort of career in the 60s. So even before a lot of some of these early legends, I saw the first people ever, Billy and Bobby Murray. I met Billy Murray once. I wanted to meet Bobby Murray even more, but Billy Murray was an incredibly fine fisherman as well, and sort of thing like that. And I ran across all kinds of different ones from Canadian champions, all kinds of things. I was able to hold my own against the most professional to the smallest little time tournaments. Always the same, depending on what region of the country, from Canada to the United States. The fish had to be in a certain size for either team tournaments, where you need to get a limit of a certain sort of a size category, and a monster. And this is what my job is I'm a monster hunter, right? So I successfully never got skunked in decades of fishing multi-species tournaments, from professional to the littlest ones, and won with the same kinds of statistics. So it didn't matter whether it's the most professional to the most amateurish. In the region of the country, if you actually look at a lot of statistics, like let's say Dale Hollow Lake, whether it's an amateur Joe tournament or the big guys, sometimes that'll go on these things, right? The weights aren't really massively different here. A lot of times, usually the big fish is going to be, whether it's professional to the smaller time tournaments, a certain sorts of sizes, right? So this is what I sort of developed as a kid by starting fishing tournaments in the 60s, everything from lake trout to all kinds of things. I'm the world's first person for sure that ever won multi-species tournaments, lake trout, whitefish, perch, crappies, saugers, walleyes, northern pike, muskies, largemouth, smallmouth, all off of spinner baits, right? By depending on the models, from the Beetle spins to Shannon twin spins, ones like that in the earliest days, to later on bushwhackers and 10 zillion homemade made ones that I started making, right? But I started making like homemade spinner baits themselves around from the later 60s, even just by taking my mother's piano wire and sort of trying to make a similar like sorts of things. But I started buying early spinnerbait molds that they had available, and things like that, and this, so I'd use them that way, but also other methodologies. I figured out how to make spinnerbaits without having to do that, and that sort of thing like that. So way before, like even when Mr. Houston came along, and all that, I thought he was magnificent. The only guy that him and Chris Houston I thought would actually be able to give me a challenge on a daily basis out with flinging spinnerbaits, right? But they're more known for just like the bass sort of aspect of it, right? I came in using these way before, like, in Fisherman Fishing Packs or any of these guys ever had any articles about these kinds of things. I won all kinds of Titanic, big pike, muskie, bass, walleyes, different ones, using monster sort of willow leaf spinner baits or different ones. Because around 74, 75, I was in this sort of lake trout trip, and I was using these early bushwhackers sort of thing, and I ran out of blades, and these smallmouth walleyes, all kinds of fish, also were hitting these. Even the odd lake trout would nail it, that were up on these shallower sort of shoals and things. The water was sort of in this lake was very cold, even in the summer months and things like that, and you'd get trout fairly shallow. But I ran out of all these things, and I saw these big gang trolls, and I'd already made big musky ones in the past, but they were based more on traditional musky, like sort of a giant spinnerbait like sort of thing, not really so much for those sort of things. So I'm using a smaller bass profile sort of spinnerbait size here. And I said, I wonder if they would work. And I whipped on this Titanic, I think it was an 8 No. 9 willow leaf sort of blade that was a weird color. I think it was like a blue and silver or something like that. I had some were copper and blue, and weird sort of variations, gold, different things that had on this Titanic gang troll. And I cast it past this log. I got a 5 pound, 15 ounce smallmouth. Let the show begin, right? I started catching even bigger pike and all the kinds of other species with these. So I kept it quiet, started hitting all these tournaments all over the place with adults when I couldn't sort of, like a lot of them, what they do is they'd allow the adult to fish with a kid or whatever, but really, like, yeah, it was me who was really reeling in these monsters. But I would pay these adult entry fees and punk out these organizers and things like that, and my consistency of winning was astonishing, right? It got so bad that they would follow me around ice fishing and everything, watch me do the whole thing, totally convinced that I must have a live well hidden in my stomach somewhere or whatever, right? Like these kinds of things. So it was terrible. I never got the sort of the backing like what the Van Dams did when they came on the scene, or some of these young guys of today. Everybody's all gung-ho for this. They'll sponsor a 20-year-old kid or 18 or these different things, right? But in my day, all these adults that I fished against, they were 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. The youngest guy would be in their 20s. And I'd slaughter these people on a consistent basis with giant fish I bring in. And I learned that whether I was fishing the earliest professional tournaments to the sort of Joe guys, that I had to come in with, and depending on the area of the country, anywhere from a 4 pound something smallmouth or largemouth to a 7 pound plus one in a few waters, or a 6 is at least something to get the big bass. And in the early team tournaments, I'd train the person that was with me on the fly to more hunt for the smaller ones. Hopefully they'll catch 3 or 4. I'm going to concentrate on big fish, and this is how we do it. And it worked out the same kind of procedures, right? And that sort of thing like that. I was also known to win triple, quadruple, even sanctuplet crowns, where I actually come and go and win the biggest bass, the biggest pike, the biggest walleye, okay, the biggest largemouth, smallmouth, some of them had, things like that, biggest crappie, all in the same day, or carp, sometimes mixed in with walleye and bass. And there was a lot of strange tournaments they had in early days, like they'd have on these rivers, biggest all-around fish. It could be a sturgeon or anything. So I'd target carp because they were the most fastest and easiest, or muskies if they weren't available. And that sort of thing like that. And actually coming in with all the biggest ones of each one, sort of thing like that. And many of the waters, the first time I fished them, 60, 70% of the time, I won with broken depth finders, no charts of the lake, no way of like of today where you can chart the whole lake quite quickly there, and do all the electronic wizardry of today, right? I didn't have any of these things. I had to use anchors and figure out where drop-offs were, dragging them along the bottom, and all these kinds of things. So I'm not a fan of all this sort of stuff, even though I taught them way before Mr. Van Dam came along or any of these other guys. I was sure that I was going to get in the Bassmasters. I just kept winning normal sort of tournaments enough to get enough money for the next fee, pay sort of thing. But the Canadian market was really cheap, and a lot of times they'd give you a lot of rods and reels and just barely cash and these kinds of things. So but what I did learn is that not to fear any of your competitors. It didn't matter. I was able to battle with the Azumis. I was able to battle with Canadian Pro Bass Classic champions. I was able to battle with the Lindners and different ones over the ages and hold my own against them. And even with broken boats and making it to classics with a 7.5 horsepower motor and still placing third or second or fourth in the classic or things like that of these different ones, right? So I also have like the Martins, this bad luck, including losing 1 by 2 ounces, a certain thing like this. And so I also have, but I was always able to easily make it in these. And so I never, didn't matter the competition, the big guys, the little guys, it was all the same. I still kept coming in, beating the big guys, the little guys with giant monster bass. So if I was in the Bass Masters immediately, I'm going to have to make a performance here. I only have one shot, right? But I was taken all away from me. I had an excellent partner there. I started training and working with him. We had a faster bass boat. A lot of times I did them in very small 50 or under horsepower motors, but we had the fastest thing going. All of a sudden started winning more and more of the bigger ones instead of third or second place, now first, right? Last one that I fished, professional bass tournament, we won fair and square by exactly 4 pounds and 1 ounces, and the most titanic, nightmarish of a thing I've ever seen in my entire life. So this is a lesson for you. Please do not pull like what I did or a George Cochran has and things like that. You need to have your partner with you if you're fishing team tournaments to make sure they're guarding the bag, make sure that the fish are being held stable, make sure these sorts of things. We called fish all day. The biggest monster, this 4 pound, 3 ounce one, that was the biggest one that I had, refused to open up her mouth no matter how many 10 zillion times, and I had the bag full of the other 5 fish quite quickly. I'd put them in, and my buddy refused to answer me. I said, please, please, there's giant waves coming. Uh-oh, now the bag's leaking. The fish are going to die. We're going to get penalties. We're going to lose this tournament because you friggin' refused to answer me. Quickly get over here. I was called the fishing Nazi by a few of them because 16 hours later, they're dying, and I say, what are you talking about, guys? We just started, like, I don't even realize what the time. So I'm pretty hardcore, right? Sort of thing. And I was infuriated that my partner isn't helping me here. Sort of thing like this. So meanwhile, now the bag's leaking everything. I decided to take the most ridiculous risk of my life. I grabbed it on the top, sort of thing like this. I waited for no waves, went to put it exactly in the bag folded over, flipped in. The fish then stabbed me in the hand when a big wave came up. It knocked me flying up sort of in the air a little bit. The fish bounced on the ground, went boink, boink, right in front of the tournament organizers and everything, right in the drink, and they saw that it was a big bass, right? And this lady gets on the microphone. She said, sir, you shouldn't hold bass that way. It's not sort of advised, right? And now all of a sudden my partner comes to awake, and he roars into hysteric laughter. He says, lady, this guy's fishing, won all kinds of tournaments. He knows what he's doing. This is my fault, and sort of thing like this. So now we lost by 2 ounces. So, and then right after that, he had some problems. We lost different sort of things. So I had, from not properly insured, 7 boats stolen from me, hundreds of fishing rods. He lost their sort of stuff quite thereafter. I was going to get him to sponsor me at a Bassmasters event and sort of take on the world here finally, right? After all these years, and then it was all taken away from me. So whatever you do, listen to these lessons. You need to find fish without magic sort of things. I'll teach you how to do all them too, of the most modern technology. Like I said, I used to work early sportsman shows. I was teaching flipping, pitching in the Canadian market when it first started coming in the Canadian scene. Flasher uses, LCDs when they came out, and different ones like that, and know my things, right? And that sort of thing like that, and fished all over the place. And like I said, even way before the Van Dams that came along, or any of these sort of things. Just sadly, in this Canadian market, the money wasn't very big, and that sort of thing like that, right? So, yeah, but I mean, like I said, I did fish 10 zillion sorts of tournament, like where a lot of them I never was on the water before. I didn't need any magic electronics or anything like that, or at least I only needed a flasher just to confirm that the fish were suspended at a certain level and that sort of thing. Actually, here's one where I did have to use a flasher a little bit, or I wouldn't have won the second prize for one of them. I had never heard of this lake in my life. We were driving around. It was called the Clayton Lake. There was a big tournament there. I went in, docked in. These organizers said, "Hey, are you in the big tournament?" I said, "No, what's it about?" They said, first, second, third for biggest walleye, biggest bass, biggest northern pike. And I said, they said, "Would you like to join us?" I said, "Absolutely." So, yeah, they checked the boat and gave me the rules and all that sort of thing. And I had an early bass boat. So these guys were following me around, and I'd never been on the lake before. And the only thing that was working was my flasher, the LC, the early, I think it was a paper grub I had that or something. I can't remember. But anyways, one of the two were an early LCD sort of one. And it was not working properly because all the areas that it would guide, there was 10 million stumps in the water, and it would hit them quite often and things like that. And it was murky, and you couldn't even see 2 inches in the water. And we didn't have some of that technology as well, right? Sort of thing. So anyways, I see that there was a storm recently, and there was these trees that were blowing down out in this island out in a main lake. And I noticed that it dropped way into deep water. It was clear. It looked extremely a big monster fish spot, right? So I was thinking there's probably a giant bass floating around up on this sort of thing, or possibly even a walleye or different ones. But mainly I wanted to get rid of the bass first. So I started pitching long distance, and after the third one, I pitched this huge spinnerbait, fluttering it down. Bango, I nailed into this monster, 7-something. I forget if it was 7.6 or 7.3, but whatever it was, somewhere in that sort of range. And I said, "Oh my God," I said, "nobody's going to ever beat this." And the organizers actually watched me hook and everything. So they knew I caught this thing, right? It was right in front of them, sort of thing like this. And they were watching me standing on the early bass trolling motors, positioning motors, sort of thing. And so anyways, I said, "Nobody on earth is going to beat this." So they said, "Well, get that in the weigh-in," and it was 7-something or whatever. So I said, "I got tons of times here." So I found this bay that had dropped off into deep water and had this huge grass line on it. And I worked this Titanic huge willow leaf spinnerbait along it. And bango, I get this pike over 10 pounds something. In those regions, I know to win, you need at least about a 7-8 pound pike bare minimum, typically, sometimes even less, 5, 6 and that. But most of the time between 7 to 10 pounds, it's a pretty decent, you're most likely going to win. And occasionally 12 or 14 if it's an unusual body of water where they have a bit more of them available in this sort of range, right? Sort of thing. So I figured there's no use keep wasting time on them. I brought it in. I was the biggest at that point, sort of thing like that. So then I said, "Man, this is a very strange body of water for walleye." It was all loaded full of stumps. It was a reservoir-like sort of thing. Looked way more like a largemouth bass factory, right? So I kept looking around, and I'm looking around the old flasher, an old green box, and I noticed this area dropped off near this bridge area. And then I also noticed these blimps that were suspended way up above the bottom, maybe 7-10 feet. And that's where I did have to have this flasher, because normally I would have went down more towards the bottom and start working up. But maybe by the time I'd figure it out, it might have been too late. These fish were there. I also noticed schools of little bait fish and things that was floating around. It was a hard bottom, boulderish of some sort, chunk broken rock sort of thing. And it dropped off in this hole. So I made this gigantic concoction, melted a bunch of twister tails and plastic worms together in Charlie Brewer, and jigged it right over the top of their heads back and forth. And this huge wave went by with a pile of skiers or something that it went by through this bridge and made this Titanic waves. And as I was going up, I actually saw the line go to the side, and I knew something must have hit it. So even though I couldn't feel them, I reeled up as fast as I could, got into this sort of thing because I was being flowing way up in the air, and I needed to make sure that I didn't have any slack line into it when I nailed them. I nailed into this. I got this Titanic monster, like 12.6, 12.8. But get a load of this. I won of course, the bass one. I won the pike one, but the third one, I didn't get the triple crown on that one. I came in second place. Some guy actually beat me by 2 ounces with the walleye division. So two monster out of a little lake like that. Unbelievable. I mean, those are pretty huge walleyes. I know even Mr. Linder most of the time isn't reeling in 12-pound plus walleyes all day, right? Sort of thing like that. So a magnificent fishery, right? But I'd never been in the body of water before, located the biggest fish of every kind of species except by this 2 ounce curse that I've had, like I said, dozens of times in professional to everything. So if you want to fish the Bassmasters, anything, don't worry about the competition. Don't worry about the Van Dams. Don't worry about Larry. Don't worry about the Rolands if he came back or any of these sort of guys. Just put them out of your head. Say, how much do I need in this body of water that you've seen tournaments in the past? What is it, the sort of weights that I'm going to be needing here to sort of at least have a possibility of a chance? Because you can't stop those guys. You can't make them do things that they're, you can't go ooga booga booga and make Kevin Van Dam freeze there on the sort of thing. Now, Money's retiring now anyway, so you don't have to worry about him. But there's the Iconellis and there's all these young guys, the Mr. Snow Leopard and all of the Canadian entourage and all kinds of characters to be battling with, right? That all believe they're the greatest bass angler in the world, right? And there's a difference between believing and knowing you are, right? I know that I can battle with the legendary anglers to the little guys. And this is what I know by hundreds and hundreds of tournaments, right? And that sort of thing like that, no matter which ones. And I know I'm a big fish specialist and I know how to catch monster fish, right? So if I ever make it to the Bassmasters, I'm assured that eventually I'm going to make an impact in there somehow, right? So if I could get back in a boat tomorrow or that sort of thing, I would. Or if I could get some, team tournament partner to work with, I get back enough to, even if I could get a big bass in one of these more ones where it's a bass boat is the first prize, there, bingo. Now I got my bass boat back. Now save for the entry fee for Bassmasters when he opens, and I somehow got to make it to the classic, right? And that sort of thing like that, and away we go, right? I finally get to fish. The only drag is that none of these people today are as exciting to me to want to be boogieing with. Like I wanted to boogie against Roland and the Jimmies and Billy and Bobby Murrays and the Bo Dowdens and all that sort of gang. And then later on, guys, even in the future, I mean, Kevin Van Dam, very impressive, that sort of thing like that, but in my statistics, being a disciple of Roland's or that sort of thing like that, he won 19 in way less amount of years, right? Sort of thing. He also was in contention way more times than anybody else and that sort of thing like that. I forget, it was 26, 27, 28 times, somewhere in there. I can't think the second, but somewhere in that he was in contention. Sort of thing, and and also gazillions of top 10 finishes and all this sort of thing. If you look at it statistic wise, he actually is sort of more, because once you get to third place, you're really not in contention anymore. There was somebody that was going to beat you, right? So even though it's impressive to be in the top 10, that's consistent. That, however, a lot of these wins again were with more modern electronics. Roland's eras was different. This is the same guy that coined pattern fishing and water clarity meter developer and all kinds of things. So this is the man to me, right? So no matter what, right, I know how to find fish without having to use all these sorts of things, right? Like fully rely on them. And I still would have gotten monster walleyes out of that spot by eventually sort of working up I have a system, I call it the system of the dragon, right? And it's a basic system that I've used since a little kid. I wrote about it in a school project, and basically have a sort of a system of working the depths, using lighter to heavy sort of line, what's available of the different families of lures, until I've gotten something, and repeating the same kind of process in other areas where likely fish or sort of thing like this is very similar, like what you would call this pattern fishing, right? But Roland and these guys made it all sort of like the earliest teachings, Tony Portencastle, all these sort of guys, right? They sort of just made it more clarified for me and different things like this. And the D. Thomas, I thank the most for this flipping early sort of stuff, and then the pitching like sort of things. These helped me modify this in multi-species of fish, win all kinds of tournaments with them, and I was already an excellent sort of flipper by the later 70s, 75, sort of thing like that. And by the later 70s, I had already won all kinds of contests here of different sorts of them, everything from walleyes to bass, pitching and flipping sort of spinner baits and that with early saltwater rods that were a bit longer, that were heavy duty and sort of things like this. And I even won a carp tournaments in the early 80s, flipping and pitching. World's first person for sure to do that. So I thank guys like him and all these kinds of guys. I studied from every expert, from the earliest guys that you could sort of think of, from the early bass legends to all of them. Worked the seminars, did all the things, but I fished way more than a lot of these guys because they had to work the floors all the time. I was out fishing, right? And I hit, typically at least 10 to sometimes 14 plus sort of ice fishing tournaments per year, and at least that many sort of open water ones, right? Sort of thing like this. So I did this as a sort of career from started, like I said, fishing against people, but right where they were adult like contests, and I would challenge these guys to pay adult fees and be able to destroy them because fairly consistently. I probably hold all kinds of world records, especially in pike tournaments, of some things like this. I brought in a 93 pike in a contest, but also caught 12 more further that were actually just barely below the legal sort of limit, sort of thing like that I released. So I actually over 100 sort of pike that I brought into an ice fishing contest right in front of the organizers, over 500 contestants. They actually started getting so mad that they were moving and drilling ice holes right beside me and still couldn't catch fish. And I brought in one the second you drop down the line, bang, another northern pikes on it. Not only did I win all the sorts of accolades of this, because each one you got so many tickets for it, sort of thing like this, but also for biggest fish, I won and everything else, right? Another one, 87 in the Ottawa River, 77 in a Quebec sort of tournament ice fishing, including bringing in some monsters up to one that was 18 pounds, right? Where I slaughtered sort of these, and things like that. I also probably would hold a world record, sort of the fastest carp tournament win. The guy rang the buzzard at 10 o'clock. I battled this fish on sewing thread on purpose with a rig that's exactly what Mr. Maddox was credited for developing later, that actually already appeared in newspapers here, using these kinds of rigs, exactly what you call a hair rig. The only difference is at the end I'd use a small English hook and thread them up that way instead of like what you use like a boilie stopper of today. And also I put pieces of cork on it and would float it up off the bottom. We also did what you call the method later on that other people were given credit for, frisbee fishing, way many years before, in the earlier sort of 70s, late 60s, started goofing around with these sort of, kids would throw my big carp baits bags that I would use. They'd make like a frisbee out of it, chuck it in the water, and one of them did this, and I watched a school of carp all ripping it to shreds. Bingo, this is the same thing as a method, and started using this, incorporating this as one of the techniques, right? So things like this. But I already actually appeared in newspapers here with this exact same kind of rigging principle, right? Exactly the same sort of thing, using sewing thread or 2-pound line, a 4-pound line, attaching to these very small little English hooks to a bait holder hook and threading up the bait that way to increase its profile, right? Well, I actually hooked in front of, there was about 500 contestants here at this tournament. The guy rang the buzzard. I worked with this guy for a few days how to properly net fish, because I hate nets and things, and I couldn't force a fish with using sewing thread. It's only like a pound, half-pound test line here, but I knew in this area they didn't bite on anything. They'd be up above the bottom and not actually be biting. So I floated this sort of what you'd call like a floating pop-up rig of today sort of thing. I floated above them. The guy rang the buzzer. The carp went by. It nailed it in front of piles of contestants. I hooked into this and I used a modified fly rod that was very noodly so that I could put pressure on this very light line a little bit more and keep his head up. I purposely targeted a smaller carp that I had seen going by because I wanted him big enough to win the thing, but that, yeah, you know what I mean? He's not going to be beyond the limits of sort of this sewing thread, certain things. So I got this thing, led his head up. The guy scooped it in. We ran into the weigh-in buzzer, and exactly at 10:01, it was weighed in and certain things. So you'd have to catch the biggest carp of the day in a tournament. You got to catch it on sewing thread and make it to the weigh-in station all within a minute. Nobody could beat this, right? So the most somebody could do is tie me. Right? Sort of thing like this. I'm also probably the world's first and only person that's reeled in 4 muskies on sewing thread, a 25-pound plus steelhead, an over 30-pound plus carp off of it, a northern pike several times, and walleye all off a sewing thread. Right? And I do this on some of my shows, and other 2 4-pound test line reeling in monstrous size sorts of fish and things, and have actually won big bass contests by going in behind professional anglers where they were really spooky fish. But I also knew the area and it was a big bass spots, so I would go in behind because I couldn't make it there as quick as they could with some of their faster boats in the early days, and I'd fish with 2 4-pound line in behind and sort of be able to actually reel in 6 7-pound plus monsters in heavy cover with extremely light line and get them in and win this sort of contest, right? So as you can see here, I'm a spinnerbait nutcase, and I keep going, right? So even though the spinnerbait's busted and this sort of thing like this, with this sort of trick, I was able to get this sort of thing like that. So I'll cover tournaments and many, many sort of things. We're going to cover plastic worms, 10 zillion more spinnerbait tricks, all kinds of things on newer shows and things like that. But this is my kind of history. I was able, like I said, so the first thing, please listen to me. Don't worry about who you're competing against. You're not competing against anybody. All you're competing against is the fish. You got to realize that you need to get a certain amount of weight in order that the rest of the field, no matter how great this guy is, he can only get a certain amount in a certain bodies of water. So you need to realize that. You also have to figure out to be able to reel in without losing fish. On my shows, you'll never see me lose fish. I reel in thousands of fish per year, and many, many seasons go by sometimes without one single fish falling off because I keep my hooks laser sharp. Like I said, I have this system of a dragon. I'll talk about it another time. I have these rules and sort of things like this, and there's certain things that I do that and I also practice everything from ultralight line to the heaviest sort of things, and constantly are doing this and learn exactly why I ever was losing fish in certain procedures that I have, right? And in the earliest days of professional tournaments, I got nervous because now I'm going against these big boys, and I actually lost the odd fish, and people, I'd be fishing saying, I never see you lose any fish. Why are you losing fish? And I realized it's because I'm allowing them to be in my mind, right? So I just started tuning these guys out, and then I stopped losing fish in the professional ones as well, right? And I didn't lose that many anyways, but I noticed I got hyper. And if I was really too hyper, I'd even have a few the night before, I'd have a few brewskis just to calm down and stay up late and be overtired. And then the next day, my hooking percentage is perfect because then I'm not stressed out. They almost don't exist, right? Like I'm just concentrated on the fish, right? So I'd almost even use things like that a couple of times I had to do because I was so hyper, right? And that sort of thing about it. So I learned in early days, you got to tune these guys out. Don't worry about them. Yes, they're magnificent fishermen. And yes, keep an eye out on what's going on. But I also don't like hearing about who's leading or any of that sort of stuff. I don't want to know these negativity, right? Because then once you believe that you're already defeated, you're defeated, right? So that sort of thing like that. And you need to learn how to read maps, how to figure out how to read terrain and things like that. If you don't have a map of the lake, you need to find the electronics. So today I'm going to cover the proper rods reel selection. So even though I'm using a lot of dollar store like things here, I worked in the industry, like I said, for ages, and one of the earliest people to ever use graphite rods and Kevlar and different sorts of things like that, and testing gorilla braid when it first came out, and these no stretch lines and all kinds of things. So I keep up with the industry. It doesn't matter so much the company you're buying from, as many of them make good products. It's all to do with gear ratios and the different sensitivity of the rod, its action, and many things. So we'll cover these in new sort of shows like this. But I just wanted to cover these sort of things and thank all these great legends that had taught me, from the earliest guys of fishing backs to all the other ones and that sort of thing like that. And they made me into a super fisherman, right? And a sort of thing like that. And right, and I wouldn't be retired. Like I said, I'd be in the Bassmasters right now if it was up to me. I just never, these Canadian company, they were so bad, right? Like, I mean, they were terrible. A sort of thing like this where they didn't pay you a lot and sort of thing. So anyways, stay tuned and we'll continue on for next show. Bye for now. So hopefully you enjoyed the first show there. You got some practical advice. I'll continue on with all kinds of different tournaments, sort of things. Each episode, a little bit of that when I'm casting and that sort of thing like that. Next show, I'll probably be mystery muskies of the canal. I may already, I had hundreds of views with the most recent one on my other sort of things. This is a thing because I do also mystery shows, and I've been in the past was put on different shows as the voice for some of these things, but that has no relevance of my fishing world, right? So even though I study mysterious creatures worldwide in that, and I'm hugely interested in Titanic fish stories to unusual animals that people have seen in the waters and on the land as well, and that sort of thing like that. These have nothing to do with sort of these sorts of things, right? So they're one has nothing to do with the other. So if you're not interested in mystery, like sort of things like that, I do mention these big fish story here and there throughout the series and things like that. But if you have any, certainly you can contact, please subscribe. The more subscribers I can get, the more knowledge that a person like my age can pass on to you guys, you know, and that might be useful for you. If one thing that I tell you help you win a tournament or catch your biggest fish of your life, I've done my job. So it doesn't matter if it's, you know, like I said, I'm not the video game kid wizard here, although I've been playing video games a long time too and love RPGs. Even though I'm an older guy, I still play them sometimes. It's been nothing more fun than getting in a fantasy world and zooping away and fighting dragons and monsters. It's pretty entertaining too if I can't sleep for a few hours and that sort of thing like that. And but the thing is that I'll cover all kinds of species and very bizarre tactics that normally you would never see in any fishing magazines, or all kinds of things, a lot of things. And I have zillions of spinnerbait tricks and things like that. And especially if you want to learn about carp fishing, you know, I stopped keeping meticulous records as a business at 25,000 carps, and this was exactly around the time when I stopped keeping meticulous records, when Mr. Maddox first appeared on the scene. So I already had gotten 25,000 carp before this, yeah, you know what I mean, any of these guys ever appeared in any of their sorts of things, right? So I'd be the first North American, what you'd call like a professional, like carp multi-species sort of angler. I was just very young, right? But I was already business oriented. I would battle with these guys, and they'd try and rip me off for weights of fish and everything, right? So I learned how to deal with sort of street-like characters to all kinds of things very quickly and that sort of thing like that. So you can get knowledge from me that you wouldn't get from other sort of professional anglers, because they didn't. Almost everybody out there that I've ever heard of, at least, none of them were like me, where they purposely did this on their own accord and built their empire themselves. No Uncle Johnny bringing them fishing every weekend or anything. I did this all on my own, right? So completely on my own accord, and the only reason I became a great angler because I had the time to cast around the clock. I lived on multi-species of water, so I could experiment with every kind of new lures. I sold so many carp every day and things like that that I could afford better fishing equipment. And adults started hiring me everything as a guide to to fish with them in professional, more bigger sort of tournaments. They weren't like the Bassmasters, but some of them were, like the earlier sort of ones when they first started these team was very similar and that sort of thing like that, and very skilled higher end sort of anglers and things like that. So, like I said, I cover all kinds of weird sort of things, and my history's a real wild one, right? And throughout the series, there I'll show you all kinds of different early pictures of me entering tournaments and all kinds of things and winning them in different ones, right? And that sort of thing like that. So anyways, I only did this just to. Our pollution is getting so bad that worldwide I'm seeing things. I'm seeing fish that used to be abundant now are almost extinct or near extinct and that sort of thing like that, all because of our stupidity of throwing garbage at our local city environments. Just because it's a city, it shouldn't have to look like a filthy dump, right? So please, when big fishing shows are on, they never show these things, but I'm sure these guys are seeing this garbage because I see it everywhere, right? So whatever you do, don't throw your garbage in the water, please. It's not hidden there. Some poor creature is down there and he may be suffocating and getting poisoned because of what you threw in there, right? And that sort of thing like that. So keep that in mind and stay tuned for new shows. And I'll cover, like I said, all kinds of different things there and much more tournaments. I'll mention everything with battles from the Azumis, the different mistakes that I made over the years where it cost me hugely, and you'll learn from my mistakes as well. So I don't mind talking about my failures just as much as winning, because it's not a brag fest. It's to teach people the rights and wrongs and things that you may make a mistake, right? So anyways, hopefully you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.